Hello, and welcome back to your next episode of the Water Trio podcast. We're talking the 23rd of November until the 6th of December, and I'm here with my friends and colleagues, Cassandra Tyndall and Kelly Surtees. So, gals, how are we all going? How are we travelling? Excited about entering the last month of 2020?
Hell yes.
Hell to the no to the yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to talk about in December. We'll only scratch the surface today, but I know we're recording this a little bit in advance, but it will be nice to have November complete. Tick that box. Although we have a big eclipse to talk about as we're crossing into,
I think we're going there first, aren't we? So we've got an eclipse, a lunar eclipse in Gemini on the 30th of November, pretty much everywhere, isn't it? It's 7:29 p.m. here in Australia, and it's happening at 8 degrees of Gemini. So who's going to take this one?
I mean, sure, unless Cass feels very strongly about it.
No, you can do this one.
Okay. I mean, look, eclipses. Okay, first of all, it's a full moon. So there's the heightened quality of energy and emotion that always comes with the full moon. But it is a full moon that's an eclipse. So the lunar axis, the lunation axis is aligning with the nodal axis. And that's technically what creates the eclipse. I think this is a partial or a pulse eclipse.
Penumbral.
So, it's not a complete eclipse. It's not a very dramatic visual kind of lunar eclipse. That said, I think energetically and emotionally, this is an eclipse that agitates or overstimulates the mind. And I'm thinking a lot about the full moon being in Gemini, a sign to do with the mind, and having the North Node there. So there's this kind of sense of, there's this insatiable desire to get more information, to know more things, and it will be very hard to satisfy. So when I've been talking with my membership about this, I've been talking a lot about the idea that we're going to have to do a lot of mental management or kind of self-care for our mind through this lunation, because I think some of us are going to have those classic full moon illumination, bright ideas, clarifying concepts. And some of us are just going to feel like our brain is about to explode because there is so much going on that we're trying to process. There might be a lot happening in a short space of time. You might be feeling generally unsettled. You know, all the mutable signs, of which Gemini is one, have a tendency to worry, and in an extreme form that can manifest as anxiousness or anxiety. And so there's a little bit of a caution here, I think, to the overstimulation of the mind. Some of you will just be madly writing or reading or studying, and that's kind of like a productive overstimulation of the mind. But for others, it's going to be worrying or ruminating or just like churning something over, thinking that if you got another piece of info or extra facts and data, you would be able to figure out this thing. And I think breath work, being outdoors in nature, I think taking deep, slow breaths is going to be a really important self-care solution. And to remind yourself that the North Node, which is the node that's activated at this eclipse, is like the top half of this godlike entity that doesn't have a lower half. And so it's constantly trying to take in more and never feeling satisfied. And so when we get the North Node overstimulation, it's a hunger for facts or ideas or interaction that doesn't actually hit the spot. So more may not be the solution at this time. So there's some of the thoughts and ideas that I have about this eclipse. How about you gals?
Well, I agree with everything you said. I don't really have that much more to add, except I think as well it's about communication too. And so, you know, there's this idea with Gemini about sociability and trying to connect things together. So there might be this really strong, deep desire to be in some kind of connection with other people. whether this is through conversation, whether this is through email, whether this is through text message. And I agree with everything you say, Kellen. There's almost this obsessive quality to it of like, well, how deep can I go? How much can I get? And it might be time to kind of, take your fingers off the phone and put it away and be a bit more still with things so that the drive and the hunger isn't overtaking. And it is that, I don't know, I'm also, the other word coming up with this is verbal diarrhea. This feeling of, often with Gemini, what can happen is it overshares or over communicates, especially when we've got this full moon involved too. So it is just, be careful of the words that you're sharing, or be careful of oversharing. And maybe, my suggestion for this would be journaling. Get the stuff out of your head onto paper, get it into reality. And I always suggest not a journal that you keep and you look back on in 5 years' time, but do the write and burn. So just write it up and toss it to the wind or burn it up, because it's not stuff you want to keep, whatever is rattling around in there. But I think, eclipses, they're like taking a chessboard and throwing all the pieces in the air and seeing what's going to come down. We don't really have much idea on what to do with this, but as always, it's not a time to be doing rituals. Don't, be doing your usual full moon rituals. Just take caution, because I think Sam Reynolds, his analogy of this was, it's like sticking a knife in a toaster when you're doing rituals around eclipses. You just don't know if you're going to get electrocuted or not. So why take the risk? Yeah. What about you, Cass? What's your thoughts about this?
Yeah, there's definitely like a real like mental buzz or busyness, or like I'm just sort of like wondering, this is happening at the last day of the month, and then, tomorrow's kind of December, and there might be this rush to connect or to converse or to, like have that networking or the sociability aspect of it. There might be that sort of desire to lean into that like too much. I'm also like aware of the Aldebaran part of it as well. It's very close to that fixed star. So it's got that kind of potency with it. Plus a North Node, it's very amplified, even though the eclipse itself isn't. So it is kind of got this duality around it. And then I also like think about how the lunation ruler is Mercury in Scorpio, which is kind of almost like the antithesis of Gemini. So
yes,
it's got a real like spidey senses component to it as well. So it's almost like, obviously be mindful of the words that you speak and the weight they hold, but it also might be about taking a little bit of time to let other people's words like rest on you before you react or act in whatever way. And there may be some type of like spidey senses vibe that you can tap into. And I think about the idea of having like two ears but one mouth. So there is this idea of listen more than you speak. And around this full moon eclipse, you might get a little bit of insight and awareness around what other people are saying or speaking. If you can work out, I know it's challenging even for me to turn down your Gemini dial just a little bit. There can be a lot that can be like maybe subliminally, can't even get that out. Mercury is stationed as we record. There is this vibe here that, it's the intellectual like processing of things, but also letting it just like, how does that feel? And again, connecting those two. So I sort of like, there's a lot going on with this eclipse. It's like a pseudo eclipse in a way. So.
And you brought up that piece about Mercury in Scorpio, and very quickly after, it's going to be sextiling Saturn. Did you want to talk a bit more about that, Cass?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting how November is bookended by Mercury-Saturn aspects. So we had the beginning of November being Mercury square Saturn, and then we sort of, go into like the November-December crossover with Mercury sextile Saturn. And that happens at 28 degrees of Scorpio Capricorn. So, this might be potentially like even finding a little bit of a, support around Saturn, whereas before there was challenge. Maybe Mercury and Saturn can come to an agreement or a negotiation or strategize a plan. I think the Scorpio Capricorn can be very strategic. So this can be a very good time to maybe, dot a few I's, cross a few T's. I had to make sure I said that the right way.
Yes, I always, whenever I use that phrase, I have to be like, don't mix them up.
It's so Virgo, isn't it?
Oh, I love it.
And before we kind of get into like the real downhill of 2020 and all that the December brings, assuming that it gets brought this year, this is maybe a little time just to sort of sit with yourself and, figure things out and, like a plan. And even if that plan changes a little bit, it's kind of a little bit of flexibility or flow with the sextile there. But there is, it's like before the silly season really kicks off and the crazy eclipse vibes, just maybe spend a bit of time with your to-do list or figure out like, what are the things I really have to get done and free up the time for the things that I would like to do as opposed to what you kind of must do. But being okay with that. I'd be really curious to see for some people if there is a little bit of a repetition of theme for how November starts and how it ends. Just with that, Mercury Saturn connecting again, like, for, a big portion of November, the first week and then at the end of the month, it's a long time. So I'll just be really interested to see if there's like maybe a culmination or some kind of answer that maybe you were trying to battle with at the beginning of the month.
Yeah, it's like the tension at the beginning of the month brought the revelations of how the path of ease can go forwards. And you still need to put a little bit of hard work in, but...
Yeah, and that full moon lighting up that aspect and an eclipse, like it's going to make things pretty clear or visible.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I've been thinking the same things, Cass, that the Mercury square Saturn at the start of November is like delayed information or information that's stuck in the pipeline that takes time to be revealed. Whereas the Mercury sextile Saturn, it's like you're at home at the time the delivery person happens, which never happens, and you can easily do the drop off or the exchange. Like that Mercury sextile Saturn on November 30th, I think it's December 1st in Australia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's basically like ease with its clarity around communication and planning, and its ease of information being delivered. Like it's serious or weighty information. It's information that has long-term consequences or a long-term application, because that's what Saturn's not, it's not just what are you doing this weekend, to what you were saying, Cass. It's like the link between the daily choices and the long-term goals or outcomes that you're looking to make. And yeah, I also think too, this is one of the last aspects, like the second last aspect that a planet will make to Saturn in Capricorn. So it's like, it's not just the wrap up of 2020, it's actually the wrap up of the last 3 years of Saturn in Capricorn, which was the cycle that began in December 2017. And Saturn in Capricorn is a huge part of the mood of these last 3 years. And so, personally and collectively, this Mercury sextile Saturn aspect feels very clarifying in terms of, oh, that's what I've been doing, or this is what I've been learning, or this is how I've grown. And that means that going forward, I don't have to, or I can do. It's sort of checking in with yourself. Maybe it's that sense of reflection around what you've done, what you've avoided, what needs to be completed, what you've outgrown. And I think to your point, Cass, around the full moon is there and it's an eclipse, and it feels to me like pieces of the puzzle coming in and just clarifying choices for the future. I'm actually really looking forward to that Mercury sextile Saturn at the end of November.
Yeah, I think there might have been something like I mentioned, with my Golden Circle membership, is the idea of this is a really good time, that the full moon is lighting up this aspect, and it is very reflective of this swan song Saturn aspect. What were the last 3-ish years about for you? As you said, Leash, journal it, write it down. What were the wins? What were the losses? What were the hits? What were the misses? And what, even though it's not been, of course, it's all individual, but for the most part, it's not been a peace, love, and brown rice kind of transit for many people. It's been, it's been just, been a little bit of a heavyweight. But as we start to emerge out of that, we can maybe start to Mercury, Saturn, and a sextile, think about what the good was, and the road was hard, but I'm glad I rode that road. It's the path less traveled type of thing. And, maybe sort of shift some perspectives or some thought patterns around the last 3 years. And what do you want to take into the Saturn in Aquarius? So what rules do you want to rewrite that you don't want to repeat? Particularly with this, I think about Saturn and the rings, like now we're inside them still. And how do you want to rewrite Mercury, your rules for the Saturn and Aquarius cycle?
Yeah. Yeah. And I had a teacher at school who she would set tests, and then before she gave the results, so the tests were like the Mercury-Saturn square, but before she gave the results, she would ask us to reflect on where our gaps were and what knowledge we had. And so where we could put a little bit of extra work in to gain the grades we really needed. And this was all in preparation for the HSC, which is the end of school exam here in Australia, or was way back then. So there was this sense of when you come up and face against something and you have to push back hard, and the challenges that we've been facing, like you put, Kel, since December 2017. I mean, it's been a hard slog. What is it, what last understandings do we need to have of that, of the gaps that we may have, and where can we shift forward from there? So it's like that last swatting, or that last understanding of, okay, these tests helped me grow more resilient. They helped me grow a spine. They helped me set boundaries and say no to things. So it's seeing in the tests and in the challenges the growth that we've all had from this space, especially as Jupiter's been in the same area for the last 12 months. So, yeah.
It's big transitions as we get to the end of the year.
Thank God. So what are we moving on to next? I think we've got Saturn moving into Sag, don't we? Pretty quickly
Mercury
after
into
this.
Sag.
Sorry, Mercury moving into Sag. Oh my God. So this is happening on the 2nd of December here in Australia. I think it's the 2nd of December for most of the world. Is it?
It's the first in Canada and the US, I think.
US. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So who's kicking that one off?
I mean, I can, unless you would like to, Cass.
Well, let's just start with, when I think of Mercury in Sag, I often think of the idea of never let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Right.
How big was the fish? It was this big.
That big. Yeah, we've got the sign of information, the planet of information, data, details, in a sign that is about possibilities and optimism and endless horizons. So, one of the reasons why Mercury is considered to be in detriment in Sagittarius, it's trying to, be focused on the big picture while looking at the details, data, and logistics and things. So, Mercury and Sag, I also think of the idea of Brene Brown, like the stories we tell ourselves. It's a great idea when Mercury's in Sag is, particularly with, in eclipse season, South Node eclipses, what are some of the maybe beliefs or the stories or the narratives that you are buying into that no longer hold true for you? So, there's a lot of sort of juice around that potential possibility too, as these eclipse vibes are still very active, as Mercury, the ruler of the eclipse, now really changes the pace and moving into Sagittarius. So, yeah, what do you girls think about that?
Well, on the one hand, I like it in that it's nice to have a planet in a sign not ruled by a malefic, having Mercury come into a Jupiter-ruled sign. So there is a sense, I don't necessarily think it's super productive for all the reasons you've said, Cass, that Mercury, is trying to measure things and be precise and organize deals and negotiations. And in Sag, it's hard for Mercury to stay on the details because it's doing the big picture. On the other hand, I'm happy at this time of year to do a little bit more big picture stuff, to think maybe conceptually or even imaginatively about what's going on. I do think there can be a sense of like scattered, like Mercury and Sag might be saying too much or saying yes to too many things, or I think Mercury and Sag can very easily get off track or, go into that big storytelling when there's like one essential piece of information. Now, we've just had Mercury in Scorpio, which is focused on that one essential piece of information and not with context. And so Mercury in Sag is like all context without maybe some of the specificity. So I think it's just understanding the difference and what it's good for. Mercury in a Jupiter-ruled sign in Sag, I think if you've got words of praise to share, or if you have, to express some gratitude to someone, or there's a generosity sort of piece that you might want to share, I think Mercury and Sag can be really good for all of those things. Mercury will be in Sag while Jupiter changes signs, I think. So there'll be just at the very end, most of Mercury and Sag has Jupiter in Capricorn. So there's still that sense of like optimism moderated or muted a little bit. So there's some of my thoughts.
And I think, for me, Mercury and Sag, it can be a bit opinionated. Like I always think about the Speaker's Corner and, the people in London. You used to walk past and there'd be these people up there having a bit of a rant. And everyone would gather to see it because there was the theatre that went with it too. But it is that sense of, okay, do I need to be adding my opinion to this piece? Is my opinion well informed? Does it, or am I just adding hot air to all the issues, making the issues bigger than they really are? So I think it's that sense of knowing when you're coming from a place that is well informed and that you do have all the logical Mercury information, and therefore building a strong opinion from that place, rather than just kind of pulling it out of thin air or saying, hey, I learnt this on Facebook or on Twitter. It's the truth. I promise it's the truth. So it's this sense of, also I think sometimes Mercury in Sagittarius is trying to juggle, okay, what's the one truth and the many truths, and how can I look at all of that as well? So there is this philosophizing piece to this as well of, I don't know, just, is there one God? Are there many gods? Is it goddess? Is it divine? Having those kind of conversations about the universe, about spirituality, are a really good use of Mercury in Sagittarius too. So,
yeah, like this existential, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're not going to be talking about like airfares and airports, that's for sure.
No.
Probably not. But maybe like learning, or, this is a great book. Yeah.
Yeah. I liked your words of affirmation, Cal. It almost feels like, while we're all kind of stuck at home this year, we could write little poems or end of year reflections with lovely things to friends as a gift.
That's a great idea. That reminds me of, I think one time I heard an interview many years ago from Tom Cruise, and he grew up really poor and they couldn't afford Christmas presents for the family one year. And so they wrote each other poems to read in front of, the family and, about each other. And, this might be symbolic of, sharing those like words of wisdom or words of praise or gratitude for the people that we love, and also honoring the sort of maybe frugality of Jupiter being in Capricorn this year. So, I think like, not suggesting that everyone writes poems to their loved ones, but, that might be a way to kind of honor that space, or, even honor yourself, or, write a lovely letter to somebody, old school rather than a text. So yeah,
Totally old
I always
school.
I always remember that.
And I think it was Marie Forleo who talked about doing gratitude. It's like, don't just say I'm grateful for you. It's like, I'm grateful for you because, get into the details of why you're grateful for somebody, or, what exactly it is you brought to their life. Take that Mercury down to there, because it brings much more richness when you're in that space.
Yeah, and I think there's something, like, I was just doing a quick little look in Solarify to see, well, who has Mercury in Sagittarius? What are some examples of people? And
Brené Brown.
Brené Brown, which we know, which we love Brené, and the stories we tell ourselves. One of you gals mentioned that before.
Mm-hmm.
And then people like Charles de Gaulle and Lady Bird Johnson, who have connections to aviation, I think. I know Charles de Gaulle does. I mean, I don't think he was – I just know that the bigger airport in Paris is named after him. I can't remember off the top of my head Lady Bird Johnson, but does one of you girls have a connection to her, or am I making things up here?
You're thinking of Nancy Bird Walton.
Nancy Bird Walton, that's who I'm thinking of. Okay. Okay, Lady Bird Johnson was First Lady of the US. Okay, clearly I need to review my politics. But this is a classic Mercury ruled by Jupiter. I'm just modeling this for everybody. Storytellers and writers like Rudyard Kipling and Louisa May Alcott, who wrote the beautiful story Little Women, which I loved as a child. So there is something about Mercury and Sag that invites us into the place of storytelling, because Mercury in Sag is usually trying to tell a story that has a message or has some kind of teachable component to it. So there is this desire to uplift or expand or educate, and Mercury in Sag has to use, a Jupiter type method, which is storytelling. So it's learning or being uplifted through hearing stories. Yeah.
Yeah, well, my dad has Mercury in Sagittarius, and I think, the being prone to exaggeration is an understatement.
Right.
In his case, well, he has a stellium, but yeah, so there is that, even if you were in trouble as a kid, it wasn't just, okay, this is what you're in trouble for and this is the outcome. It was the whole 9 yards of ranting, raving, it wasn't okay, get to the point, so it was that kind of, and he would captivate you with the story if he was telling you
yes.
a fun story as well.
Yeah, but it can go a little bit wild, I guess.
Totally.
Yeah. So I think it'll be a nice mood change. I'd rather have Mercury in Sag as we start thinking about what's next in terms of, some of the major cycles that are going to be kicking in later in December.
Yeah. Yeah. And talking about going wild, or maybe not so much, but we've got Venus trine Neptune finishing out this.
We're not done yet. I forgot.
Finishing out this fortnight. So that's happening on the 6th of December here in Australia in the afternoon. So that's the 5th of December in the US and Canada. Mm-hmm. Anyone want to kick off on this?
Well, feeling all the feelings, I guess. Venus in Scorpio, Neptune in Pisces. And over a weekend in December, I mean, in pre-COVID times, this would be party weekend. There would be a lot of celebrations going on, whether that's drinking or shopping or maybe, figuring out what kind of donations you might want to make this season. It feels like there's a mix of wanting to kind of escape or chill out and relax a bit versus feeling so much that you're swept up in this sense of compassion or consideration for people that may not have what you have, relative to your place. So a lot of focus on what you might be able to do to maybe create closeness or togetherness. And with Neptune in the mix, sometimes we just intuitively pick the best thing in the moment to create more togetherness. And sometimes we kind of fixate on something that we think will bring togetherness that is actually really missing the mark. So there's just that little hazy bit with Neptune. What do you girls think?
Yeah. I think it's the compassion and the kindness piece, and it can be where the boundaries get a bit blurred in relationship as well. It might be that over-giving, over-connecting with people, although Venus in Scorpio might be a bit like, oh, I only want to go so far, but Neptune takes it too far. And like I always love this connection for creativity and imagination and what's possible. So this might be a weekend to, get your paintbrushes out or write, use that Mercury and Sag along with this to be writing stories or doing anything that, taps into that imaginative, magical world that's possible. And I do find, Venus trine Neptune is that sense of how can I bring the magic into my connections with my partners? What is it that I'm seeing? Might be pulling the rose-colored glasses on around your partners and around the people that you share your life with and your loved ones. But it might be a good time to be doing this. It might be where we can kind of get swept up in a bit of romance and a bit of connection and allow that magic to flow in because, man, it's been a dry year. So, this brings a bit of water. It's like the rain after the drought. It brings a bit of water in. So allow yourself to get swept up, or it could even be as simple as a weekend at the beach. I mean, especially for us here in Australia, it's summertime. Yeah. So not so much for the Northern Hemisphere.
I remember December's at the beach. But I love that point, Leash, about the wetness and all the things that wetness can bring with feeling or connection or what have you.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Cass?
Yeah, it's got more on a practical level and being on the weekend. It's got, and it's now like early December and it's almost got that feeling, okay, I'm going to go out just for one drink. And then it could end up like a lot more than that, with the Neptune component. It's like Venus and Neptune together. It's like, let's get together with, people we may have like not caught up for a while. Of course, if you can, if it's safe to do so, and, all of those kind of 2020 limitations. But there is this idea of, you get together with a friend and just, maybe the wine is flowing, the conversation's going. And remember that time, Leash, we just like knocked down a bottle of Prosecco and then we ran to the shop to get another one. It all just went down so well and the connection was really great. And, just those beautiful conversations, Venus is in Scorpio, there's a little bit of depth there and, just really those beautiful connections that we've been so bereft of this year. I think, if the right circumstances, the right people, and you've got that lovely kind of flow happening there as well. So, could be a really great time to, where you can make the time for the people that really matter and spend some time with them.
Yeah. And it could even be that, where you on Netflix and you start watching a TV series and you're like, I'm just going to watch one episode. And then suddenly you've watched all 8 and it's 3 a.m. and you're like, oh my God, what have I done? So definitely don't pack your weekend full of specific places to be or, times to do things. Be flexible with your schedule this weekend if you can, so you can just go with the flow.
Yeah, that's the lovely part of it. It's not happening on a Monday morning, so you can just enjoy it.
I always love when there's a big Neptune aspect over a weekend. For people who have weekends off, I think it's just a nice, fluid, floaty, you don't have to do all the usual things. And you can be kind of in that fluid feeling space rather than the regimented schedule, do this, do that. So
yeah, that's it. Or you don't have to cut a good time short because there's something else to be done or somewhere else to go. It can be like the conversation's flowing or the food is really great or whatever's going on. And you can just, go with that.
Yes, totally.
Exciting.
Very. So it's a nice end to the fortnight and then kind of taking us into the rest of December. So what have you girls got coming up this fortnight?
Check my calendar.
Are you planned?
The 23rd of November. I'll be
Cass?
just continuing to teach my 4-part course, giving people all the skills and tools to plan their year ahead using the timing techniques of profections and transits. I'm sitting back a little bit from my microphone because the sun has changed as we've been talking. So that's what I have going on, just getting close to the end of the year. What do you each have on?
Alicia?
I don't have anything at this stage that I know of. I'll be just teaching as well, my beginner's astrology. And if anyone is interested to know more about the nodes, I do have on my courses the webinar that I did earlier this year about the changes of the nodes into Sagittarius and Gemini. So there is a bit of information on that if anyone's interested. I'll pop the links in the notes. What about you, Cass?
Yeah, I have to admit, I am a little bit quiet at the moment. There's not a lot happening because it's still all in the pipeline. So yeah, maybe I'll have a little bit more to share next time, but still got spaces for consultations, and there's my back catalogue of webinars and things. And yeah, so hopefully so much more news next week on Mercury and Sagitt.
You're still in the writing cave at this time, aren't you, hon?
Yeah, emerging slowly. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thanks everyone. As always, love your comments. If you like, subscribe, share, do all the things. And happy December.
Yes. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.